Thank you for that great gift. Laval, I'll invite you to join me at the front. And I was going to say there's seats in here, but there's really not. We'll try to pull ourselves a little bit up front so you can maybe see us a little bit better. I'm really pleased to have Laval St. Germain with us. Do you want me to use this mic? Yes? I'm good. Okay. This one? Okay. Laval St. Germain with us today.
Thanks, John.
I met Laval first when I heard him speak. A couple of years ago, I was at the Village Brewery. Someone invited me to come and hear him speak about a journey he'd been on, rowing from Halifax to France, somewhere in France. And yes, you heard the right, rowing a boat. And as I began to think about this series that we're looking at in September on WTF, What the Faith, and the fact that we're all on different kinds of journeys, I thought, is there any way of having Laval come to be among us? And this seemed to be the day that worked for us to have him. So I'm really pleased that he is here. His wife Janet was here at the first service, and I give thanks for a great conversation I had last February with him about some of his journey, and then wanted to share him with you today. And so he's going to quickly show us some of the places he's been. He's been on the 7 highest peaks in the 7 highest continents, is that right? Or 7 highest peaks on 7 continents, is that
close.
right? Something like that?
Close.
Okay.
The
Math was never my
highest
subject.
peak on each of the 7 continents.
Okay, try that again.
The highest peak on each of the 7 continents. So the highest place on 7 continents.
Like it. So,
great. So yeah, that's Mount Everest. I think you guys have probably heard of that. This is the highest mountain in Australasia, which would be in Papua province of Indonesia. So we've taken all of Southern Asia, grouped them together, because even though Australia is a continent, as mountaineers, we don't really count it, because I've literally run to the top of the highest mountain in Australia. No offense to any Aussies. Are there Aussies in here? We'll have a Vegemite sandwich later. This is rowing across the North Atlantic Ocean. And I've just a brief story, John. When Psalm 139 was read, there's a connection here, so bear with me for a second. But when you row sitting on a rowing seat for that long, 2 months, it's tough on some parts of your body, not your shoulders, not your arms, but your butt. So before I left to row across the ocean, I was talking to a Canadian Olympian, Adam Creek, and he told me, I said, anything I should know before I go? And he said, yeah, you have to, look after your butt. And I thought he meant metaphorically, like cover your butt, look after your butt. And so I paused and I said, you mean like just be careful? And he goes, no, literally, dude, look after your, well, he didn't say butt. And I said, okay. He goes, yeah, it's gonna you're gonna do some serious damage to that part of your body. I said, okay. And he goes, what we discovered, because he tried to row from Africa to Brazil, but they ended up capsizing, and there's a group of them that got rescued, or he wouldn't be talking to me on the phone. And he said, no, you have to row naked. So luckily for you guys in that shot, I hadn't remembered this bit of advice yet, but as I was rowing, I was in a lot of pain. I was sitting on multiple layers of protection on my seat, and eventually I went, oh my goodness, I've got to row naked. But one thing, John, I didn't consider is that when you row naked, you leave yourself open to some fairly unique sunburn opportunities. So, just bear with me. So, I'm arriving off the coast of France. It's really foggy. A sailboat comes out of the fog. I'm almost done. And these 3 Frenchmen are circling my boat. They're asking me where I'm from. And I told them I came from Halifax. And there's a Halifax in the UK. And they said, wow, that's so far. And I said, no, Halifax, Canada. Then they freaked out. So they're really circling me. And they take off into the fog. And just remember now, I'm naked during this conversation. So now they come back out of the fog suddenly. And they said, oh, we're so sorry. You said your wife's here to meet you. Where is she? And I said, well, she should be on this dock and such and such a spot. And they're circling me in their much taller boat, looking down at me naked. And I told them the water was really cold. And they were circling around. They said, we'll get your wife and we'll bring her back so she can film you coming into shore. So Janet's now on the dock in France, and she's just standing in the fog. She has no idea where I am. And these three crazy French pirates come by, and they're yelling her name. They're going, Janet, Janet. And she's looking around. She raises her hand. They come by, and she steps onto this pirate boat and literally doesn't know who these guys are. She steps onto the boat, and the guy says, we found your husband. He's naked. So Lucretia, I will meet you here next week. You in your bikini and me in my loincloth.
Things you never thought you'd hear at church. There you go. Next week's buck naked. Leave your bathing suit at home. That's it. There's so many. Keep going on this. I think
sorry, I got carried away there. That's running across the Grand Canyon twice in one day. Mount Everest, that's me approaching it from the Tibet side. This is New Year's Eve this year, just having climbed the highest mountain in Antarctica. That's me on, I was going to say the guy with the gray beard, but the guy with the black toucan. This is in our own backyard. This is the backside of Nikiska, running up Mount Allen, just one of my training days. Spectacular country back there. Nobody will guess where this is, but that's the Aegean Sea behind my son, my teenager, and he's skiing up Mount Olympus to ski down it in Greece. I rode from the Tuktoyaktuk in the Arctic to Dawson City in the middle of wintertime. That was chilly. And this is just a beautiful shot of one of my favorite places in the world, Nunavut. So this is the very northern tip of Baffin Island. We did a ski mountaineering trip there, and it was interesting because normally when you ski mountaineer, you're worried about avalanches and crevasses, and we were worried about avalanches, crevasses, and polar bears. So it was a bit unique.
Wow, that's incredible. When I heard you at Village Brewery, you used a metaphor which I really like, because you talked about how in the journeys that we're on, there's moments where you come to where you've got to shove off the dock, as an example. You push off and then suddenly you're on the water. Or you talked about how you got to step out, what it's like to sit in your tent, a little bit of nylon or whatever that material is holding you in before you unzip it and step out on the top of a mountain. And so the metaphors of shove off and step out are actually what, I'd say that's what faith is. We all got to shove off at some point and step out. And you use that metaphor to talk about faith. What's it like to be in that moment for you of shoving off or stepping out? What's that like?
Yeah, I think we all have that, right? I mean, you've got less than a millimeter of tent fabric surrounding you. And even at minus 40, you get inside of a tent with your sleeping bag, your stove, your water, your food. With the sun shining in that tent, you can actually have your jacket off. It's incredibly safe and comfortable, but it's minus 40 outside. You do not want to go outside. And you start to build a narrative in your head, reasons to just like when we hit the snooze in the morning, when we wake up in the morning on a cold winter morning, we don't want to go outside. We don't want to go to the gym. We don't want to get ready and get prepared for a day the way we should. And we all have that. And stepping out of the high camp on Everest and pulling that zipper down to step outside was daunting, but far more daunting was standing on that secure dock in Halifax, standing on North America, and then shoving off in that 20-foot long, 6-meter long boat to row across the Atlantic. And that was tough. And that's why my slogan is, when I do my public speaking, is to step out and to shove off. And we all need to be able to do that. And it's difficult. And I have just the same difficulties that all of you have with new challenges and fears. And I think it's important to confront that. And it could be something as unimportant as rowing across the ocean, or as critical as dealing with cancer, or relationship issues, or career changes. So I think we need to realize that we all have that hesitation before we kick off from the dock.
Yeah, and that push off or shove off into the uncertainty is what faith is, because we're not sure. But nonetheless, we do it. Here's a question that sort of comes to me. Why do you do this? You're a great guy and everything, but why do you put yourself through this?
Because I love discomfort and I love challenge, and I love taking a map and building an expedition, whether it's a ski trip, a cycling trip, a rowing trip, or a climb. It's very simple, and I think that's important to us, that we all have a goal all the time. And my goals are just maybe slightly different than others. But I love that. I love that idea of dreaming up something and putting it together. And some of the stuff I've dreamt up has not been done before, and you just simply figure it out. And I've got no special sauce, no special genetics. I'm a boy from northern Alberta, a small farming town, who I guess was lucky enough to have parents that really instilled in me that you can do it if you really want to do something. Figure it out.
So yeah, did it start at home? How did you, in a small farm in northern Alberta, suddenly decide I'm going to do this? Was there something going on when you were a kid that?
I blame it on learning how to read. So National Geographic. Back then there was Life magazine, Farley Mowat, Ernest Hemingway. I read Tarzan, and I mean, that's why I dressed like Tarzan when I rode across the ocean, I guess. But I wanted to do all that stuff. I mean, I was the kid who would not wear socks all summer long so I could have feet like Tarzan. So it was just an imagination gone wild, and I still haven't grown up.
Nice. Well, we're glad for that. We are. You know, I said it early in the service that religion is about that awe experience where we go, you know, and our breath is taken away. Is really that sort of initial moment. When you look at all you've done in 50-odd years and some of the journeys or in life, when was your breath taken away?
It's just 50 years, not 50-odd years.
50-odd years. In 50-odd years. So when was the moment when your breath was taken away?
So I was in Iraq skiing and climbing in northern Iraq, as you do, and I was on the Iranian border in an area where some Americans had been kidnapped a couple years before and held for 2 years by Iranian militia, and I was really concerned about being kidnapped by Iranian militia in my tent, which was a new concern to me as a camper, and I went to sleep.
Who cares about bears?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So I went to sleep that night, and I woke up in the morning, and it was snowing and muddy, and I was in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Iraq, and I heard a cough outside my tent, right outside my tent, from me to UA. And, you know, instant near heart attack. This is it. Janet, my wife, is going to be so mad at me. I've been kidnapped. I'm going to be gone for 2 years. And as I unzipped the fly of the tent, talking about stepping out of your comfort zone, I saw that below the level of the fly was a pair of boots, khaki pants, and a butt of a rifle. So now I know for sure I'm about to be kidnapped by the Iraqi militia. I unzipped the tent. I looked at the guy. He was a young man standing there with an ancient shotgun. He was a Kurdish villager that lived in the mountains. And I immediately realized this guy wasn't Iranian. And I've also climbed the highest mountain in Iran and skied off it, but it was a different trip. But he was an Iranian, and through the basic Kurdish I had and sign language that he had, I figured out that he was hunting ibex. He told me he was hunting ibex. And so we squatted there in the mud, in the snow of the mountains of Iraq, and I gave him some of that Lind sea salt chocolate. And I shared, yeah, it was spiritual. And
we call that communion.
Yeah. And we shared my 1 cup of tea. So I'd say, give it to him, and he'd give it to me. And we sat there and had this sign language conversation, and that was something I'll never forget. That this Westerner in the middle of the Iraqi mountains and this Kurdish villager had this moment, and we shared. And ISIS developed about 1.5 years after that. And I've always wondered what happened to the young man, because the Kurds were fighting ISIS. So it's a special moment, and it's bittersweet looking back at that time. But that was an incredible moment I'll never forget.
Awesome. That's neat. You know, when you think about the theme of journey, we've been talking about how all of us are on different kinds of journeys, whether it's starting school or starting a new relationship or cancer journey, whatever that is, we're all on them. Inevitably, we bump up against the wall and we say, WTF, gosh. And I wonder your experience of that is. When's the bottom fallen out, or when have you experienced tragedy that's been part of a journey that shaped you?
Well, part of life's journey, I've got the ultimate tragic WTF moment 5 years ago. July 16th at 2:30 a.m. I was sleeping in our youngest son's room. It was a hot summer night, and at 2:30 my cell phone rang, and I saw it was from Norman Wells, Northwest Territories, and I picked up the phone, and it was Constable Aucoin of the Norman Wells RCMP telling me that our oldest son, Richard, had been canoeing on July 15th, so a few hours before that, and his canoe capsized, and he was missing. And the Mackenzie River in Norman Wells, the Mackenzie River is the second largest river in North America. It's 5 kilometers across there. And I know the river well, and so I told Constable Aucoin, I said, well, unfortunately, I think you and I both know what that means. And he goes, yes, I do. And we lost our son that night. So WTF was there was no faith in that. It was the other form of WTF, and it was horrific. But at the same time, you have to keep moving. And I sat on the edge of that bed for exactly 15 minutes. And the strange thing is, when I look back on that phone call when you look at your phone at your call display, that phone call took 1 minute, and it changed our lives forever. And they're irreversibly changed. But having said that, we are still living, we're still moving forward, and we're not different from anybody else. We are all gonna experience tragedy in our lives. And for those who have been here longer, like more than 50 odd years, you will experience it, and that is part of life. And don't think that you're special when you get touched by tragedy. It is part of the human condition. And life doesn't end, even though when you lose a child, it feels like it's going to. You keep on moving forward. So that was our WTF moment. Far greater and grander and more painful than anything I've submitted myself to.
Well, that's the thing. You're sitting amongst people. Every one of us have that moment when some news has come to us about our life. Some event has taken place where we say that. And it's because it's part of life, as you say. And one of the things that I love about a church experience is that we don't come here because life's going great all the time. We come here when things have fallen out through. And so everyone who's here today knows that will happen or has happened, and we're not alone. The United Church Creed first line is, we are not alone. And whether it's sitting together or recognizing when you are alone that you're not alone is an incredibly great gift. And I know that you and your family have made a bit of a tradition since then about supporting people in the north around donations. What's that about?
Yeah, when Richard died, we started the Richard St. Germain River Rescue Fund, because Richard went canoeing at 9:15 at night on July 15th with a pretty girl that he was starting to see, who took a break from university, was working as a waitress at a hotel in Norman Wells, and he was a young bush pilot starting out. I'm an airline pilot, and he was a pilot just starting out. And so he was courting this girl, and they went on a canoe, and Richard had canoed a lot. Him and I have been canoeing all over the place. He took a river rescue course with me when he was a young boy, and they were only 20 meters from shore when the canoe capsized, and he told her to swim for shore, and he stayed with the boat because he'd borrowed the boat, and he didn't have a life jacket on. So we, every spring, send up between 50 and 75 life jackets to the communities of the Northwest Territories along the Mackenzie so that people have free life jackets.
Yeah. It's a great news story about how when something happens for us, we can say, what can I do? That's one of those things. You know, and I remember last fall, I wasn't working at the time, I remember listening to the radio, CBC, and I heard you on there in an interview, and you were in Antarctica, and you were making the journey across there, and the interviewer said, what's it like? And you said, it's like swimming in a cold glass of milk. And that's sure you can see that image. And you said to the interview, you said, if anybody's got the Shepherd, would they please send a copy of this, because it's a Christmas tradition. Can you tell us a bit about this piece? Because I'd never heard about it, and it was so cool to hear.
Does anybody know the Shepherd? The story that, wow, that's great. I like these people. So every Christmas Eve since I was a young boy, as it happens, at 6:30 p.m. plays The Shepherd, and it's about a young fighter pilot in the late 1950s just ferrying an airplane from a base in Germany, a British guy, ferrying an airplane from a base in Germany back to England on Christmas Eve. And he's out over the North Sea, and he has a complete electrical failure of this jet, and he's got nowhere to go. Everything's fogged in on the UK side. He doesn't have enough fuel to go back to Germany, and he's running out of options, but suddenly he sees an airplane flying above the clouds that is signaling to him to follow him, and it'll be his shepherd. And shepherds were an actual tool that the Brits used to help damaged bombers come back during World War II. So they'd know that there is a damaged bombers coming across the channel after bombing the Axis powers in Europe. So they'd meet up with them and they'd lead them back to an airfield of safety, literally flying formation. So he figured that this was some old World War II guy, a veteran who was doing this he happened to be flying that night, found out this guy was in trouble, and was leading him back to safety and through the clouds. And I'm not going to tell you the rest of the story. You have to listen to it. But it's a tremendous story. And being an airline pilot, I love that the metaphor in this story and the fact that he's called the shepherd, and it's the ultimate Christmas story. So at our house on Christmas Eve at about 6:28, I yell at everybody to turn the lights off, put their phones down, and we all listen to it. It lasts about 30 minutes or so. It's a special tradition. Try it out.
Yeah, it's a great piece. I was glad that you talked about it. Earlier in the service, as part of our tradition, we mentioned that we're an affirming congregation. We also do land acknowledgement and talk about Treaty 7 land. What's been your experience when you've gone around the world about different lands and traditions as we are starting to remember the places where we walk or travel?
Yeah, we talked about, we talk about climbing mountains as if you're conquering a mountain. We always talk about Sir Edmund Hillary as conquering Everest, him and Tenzing Norgay, who's never mentioned, the Sherpa that he was with. And you don't conquer a mountain, you don't conquer the Atlantic Ocean, you don't conquer rivers in the north, you don't conquer any mountain peak that I've been on. I always feel like I've done the preparation ahead of time, well before I got there. So I'm not. We talked about this earlier, where there's a famous Greek philosopher an unknown Greek philosopher, Archilochus, who said that you don't rise to the level of your expectations and hopes, you fall to the level of your training. So I always try to make sure that I'm always prepared. Hence the loincloth when I was sunburning myself, Lucretia. And when I'm in these areas, I respect the indigenous traditions that evolved in that area. So if it's in the Himalayas, it's the Tibetan Buddhism, because I was in Tibet. If I'm in the Arctic, it's either the Inuit beliefs where an Inuit will shoot a seal, he'll open the seal's mouth, and he'll drink water, and then let water dribble out of his mouth into the seal's mouth to give the seal its last drink, because that honors the Inuit god of sea mammals called Sedna. Whether it's the Dene in the Northwest Territories, who told my son Eric and I, when we canoed the next year from Great Bear Lake to Norman Wells in a way for us to deal with Richard's death, that every time you go on the river, you feed the water before you get on it. So we'd have our breakfast, we'd load the canoe, we'd save a little bit of our breakfast and put it in the water. And I really like that. I like beliefs. I like honoring the beliefs that evolved in that area. And it's important to me. I think you respect the land you're on, you respect the beliefs of the people in that region.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and in the Bible, which is a collection of books, it's the book of Genesis has two ways of looking at creation. Actually, there are two creation stories in the Bible, which is kind of funny. You'd think there'd be one. But in one, it talks about conquer and dominion over the earth, and the other one is cultivate and take care of the earth. And theologically, these days, we're talking about the earth is God's body. It's a beautiful way of thinking about the earth. Everything comes from the earth, God's body. When you think about that, and you think about where you've been, how does climate change fit in what you've seen and how you connect to the earth and what we're doing to the earth?
Yeah, I'm in it all the time. I live in the weather. I'm an airline pilot. I check the weather almost as often as a farmer does. and I'm directly exposed to it. I mean, I haven't flown since yesterday, but you are always seeing changes, whether it's more fires now, more forest fire forest fire smoke in the air, whether it's less ice on mountains or less ice in Nunavut. You see the changes, and to specifically address one thing, which would be climate change, I think is an error. Unfortunately, I think that possibly the climate change engine is started and running, and I don't know if we can have a big impact on it unless the entire planet did something, which is not going to happen. But I think it's far more important that we all respect nature, and it's not separate from us. And we all seem to think nature is separate. I got out in nature today. It's nice to be out in nature, but it's not separate from us. We need to collectively look after, whether that's walking through your neighborhood and picking up garbage instead of letting your neighbor pick it up because it happens to be on that side of the line, whether it's recycling properly. I know it feels great. I know it feels fantastic to have your plastic cup and put it in a recycling bin, but is it even recyclable? Did you clean it out first? I mean, waste and the way we treat the earth I think it's critically important that if we all played a small role, I think that'll make a bigger difference than unfortunately, climate change treaties that countries can, with one administration, decide not to follow it. Where if all of us did it as citizens, it would be more important. So look after the earth. It's all we got. This is like my boat in the ocean or my tent on a mountain. If I don't get back to that, I'm gone. If an astronaut does a spacewalk and doesn't make it back to his ship, he's gone. We have to look after that ship. We have to look after that boat. And when you're in the middle of the North Atlantic Ocean, you realize how important that little tiny piece of fiberglass is, and pretend that that's what we're on.
So, when you look at the peaks you've climbed and the journeys you've been on, what's one of the biggest challenges just living day to day in Calgary? The biggest risk or the biggest challenge?
Well, I ride my bike to work every day, so drivers are a bit of a risk. And one of the things that drives me nuts now, and I'm sure some of you is the same, is that pretend this is a cell phone, that especially with the youth, is that life is not in your hand. This is not life. Life is in your hands, right? So wrap your hands around some bike handlebars, some skis, put them on somebody's back, shake a hand, but your life is not in that phone and in that screen. I rode my bike here this morning, and I only saw one person who wasn't staring at their phone. And it's because she had 4 dogs on a leash, so she had both hands occupied. But how many of us have been to a playground now and seen a mom with her pram or her stroller, the kids playing, and the mom staring, or the dad, staring at the phone? I mean, this is not real life, even though it's ringing like it is. Boy, did I time that right.
That's pretty good. But it's her mom. It's her mom. It's okay. It's your mom. Talk to your mom. Tell your mom.
Moms are important. Let's put her on speakerphone.
Yes, put her on. Hi, Mom.
So that to me is a huge challenge, and as a cyclist, you see it more and more because you're looking into cars, and everybody drives with their phone in their hand. Everybody's on their phone. It scares me. It scares me from a safety point of view, but I don't know what it's going to do. We're running a mass experiment here on people living through filtered photos of the best days of people's lives versus real life, and I think it's dangerous.
Okay. And I don't know if there's anybody, we do have time. We're going to be done by noon, so I'm not sure. If anybody's got a question that you want to ask, put up your hand quick. Okay.
Stepping out requires faith that you are kind of prepared. Does it also require the faith in the people around you?
It depends. Yeah, it depends.
Okay, I'll just repeat it. It requires to step out. It takes faith of some sort, but also faith in the people around you. Is that right?
Yeah, not kind of prepared, really prepared for sure, or I wouldn't step out. But if you're climbing with other people, for sure. And think about that. I mean, you're literally, and depending on what you're doing, you're literally tied to somebody else. So yeah, you need faith in your partners for sure, faith in your preparation, and yeah, sometimes that's difficult because if your partner falls, he's taking you with you.
I'm just thinking of some of the folks, young people who are coming out to their parents in the LGBTQ spectrum.
Yeah.
That sometimes can be big. That is.
Well, imagine that. Just imagine being in that position where you've got to unzip that and step out, where you have to step out of that cultural and societal envelope that says that, you know, you're either this or you're that, and if you're not that, you better not tell anybody you're not that. I mean, that's horrific. And I think it takes more of an effort for the receivers of that information than it does for the person sharing that change or that information to their parents, their colleagues, their loved ones. But yeah, I mean, I've got my own views on that kind of stuff, and I just think I could care less who somebody loves. That's up to them. And if they want to come out, or if we are lumping people into different categories less than ourselves because of their of who they love, I think we've got big problems in our society. So.
Okay, we're going to have a chance to chat with you after this, but last question is, so when you've done whatever the adventure is, riding home from work or riding home from church today or climbing down Everest, what's the first thing you do when you make it back home?
When I make it back home, so riding, just to be clear, coming home after climbing Mount Everest is a little different than riding home from the airport. Psychologically, it's different, and I haven't lost as much weight. So, but yeah, I mean, we all want that safety. We all want that someplace where we're rooted. And I can tell a very short story about that.
Yep. Go ahead.
And on the night before we went to the summit of Everest, on May 23rd, 2010, we got to high camp. Very difficult to set up a tent at 28,000 feet above sea level. And we didn't pack sleeping bags because we wanted to be light, so we slept in our down high-altitude suits. And we were on a 20-degree slope, so every time you relax, your legs relax, you slide to the bottom of the tent, you push back up. It was myself and a British climber. He was on oxygen, and I wasn't. So we actually drifted off to sleep, and I put a bandana over my eyes, and he was lying beside me. And the plan was to get up around 9:30 at night and leave about an hour and a half later and go to the top. You leave in the middle of the night. And I all of a sudden fell asleep, obviously, because I was dreaming that I was at home. And we're talking about home and how important it is. And I was on my couch at home. I could hear my two teenagers talking and bickering a little bit, Andrea and Richard. I could hear our youngest son, Eric, playing with his Lego. And I could hear Janet cooking dinner because I could hear the pot on the stove rattling and kind of hissing. And as a man, it is so comforting to be laying on the couch with your whole family around you, knowing dinner's almost ready, and you're having a nap. I mean, think of everybody, every guy in here knows that. And so I was in the safest, smuggest place on earth, and then I woke up and I couldn't see because I had my bandana over my eyes. And I took the bandana off, and I looked up, and I was in the highest camp on earth, about to become the first Canadian to go to the summit. And I remember lying there going, wow, a second ago I was in Southwest Calgary on my couch, ready to have dinner with my family around me. Now I'm alone, basically, because I ended up climbing by myself, and about to have the toughest physical day of my life. And it really makes home sweet after you do something like that, for sure. So being home is where I'm rooted.
Thank you. And thank you for taking time to be with us, to share some of your story. And we know we'll have you back in some way to be among us to provoke and challenge and comfort, inspire. So I wonder if the congregation would like to just say thank you.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Can I just say one?
What?
I just want to say one thing about this guy is I was introduced to John. A friend of mine, David Gray, who's a member here, said, "Do you want to go for coffee with a buddy of mine?" I'm like, "Sure, whatever." "What's his name?" "John." I'm like, "Wow, sounds like a real ethnic name." And I said, "Oh, okay, sure. Where do you want to meet?" Whatever. And we went to Kensington. So I sit down with these guys, and we have a coffee, and it probably lasted about an hour. And John and I were engaged in conversation. And I got home, and I rode my bike home. And my wife Janet said, "How was it?" Because I went for a coffee, and she goes, I said, "Babe, it was bizarre. I met this guy. I had one of the most interesting conversations of my life." And I've done a lot of stuff. I've been around the world. I've got some pretty cool experiences, but meeting John was something else. And then I read John's article in the Globe and Mail as well, and he's an interesting dude if you guys don't know this. But then John all of a sudden reached out to me. He said, "Hey, do you want to come speak at church?" And I'm not a religious guy. And I'm like, "Well, are you sure you've got the right number?" And so we met for coffee, and I just want to say that you're a unique individual, and you've got a great message, and thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay.